Hello, my name is Piran White. I'm Deputy Director of the NERC BESS or BESS programme. The BESS programme is concerned with biodiversity and ecosystem service sustainability, and it's a Natural Environment Research Council funded programme being run from the University of York. As I said, I'm Deputy Director. The Director is Dave Raffaelli. BESS is a 6-year programme running between 2011 and 2017. The aim of the BESS programme is to focus on 3 specific themes to do with biodiversity and ecosystem services. The first theme is to examine the functional relationships between biodiversity and ecosystem services in different types of landscapes. The second theme is to address the resilience of these biodiversity ecosystem service relationships to changing conditions, so whether these are changes brought about by policy changes or environmental changes. And finally, we want to develop indicators to monitor ecosystem services and the benefits we achieve from them over time. So how these themes are going to be operationalised within the programme? Well, we're addressing 3 main questions within BESS. The first question is to see how biodiversity within landscapes underpins the delivery of different ecosystem services at a range of scales and across gradients. So we're particularly interested in how to quantify the flows of ecosystem services and benefits from Pacific ecosystems such as this coastal wetland. We're also interested in the extent to which these services and benefits are sustainable. So if we increase our demands from these specific ecosystems in terms of the services we require, are these ecosystems resilient enough to continue supplying them in the face of these changing demands? And if we start to decrease some areas of these landscapes or ecosystems, can we still maintain these flows of services and benefits? Or is this going to start having adverse impacts on our ability to acquire benefits and the ability of these ecosystems to continue to provide the services that underpin them? The second question is to establish whether there's critical levels of biodiversity required to deliver different kinds of services. So in this mixed lowland agricultural landscape, we may be using this for a combination of things like food production, recreation and so on. Are we able to sustain these services and the benefits we derive in the face of other changes? So for example, with increased demands for food production, if we place increased food production pressure on these landscapes, will this have an adverse effect on the other services or benefits that we get from them? Similarly, in the future, these landscapes may be affected by climate change. Is this going to have an impact on the ecosystems and the benefits they provide? And is demographic change in terms of increased public recreation pressure going to have an adverse impact? The third question is to deal with the development of novel tools and indicators. What we want to do is be able to track biodiversity and ecosystem services in these different landscapes. And it's only by doing this that we can start to quantify and evaluate the impacts that we're having and to plan to use these landscapes in a sustainable way. So we need to develop novel ways of looking at these landscapes. And many of these ecosystem services are quite hard to quantify. So this is quite a challenging area for the programme. So which landscapes are we going to be looking at? Well, we're going to be choosing our landscapes according to the fact that they deliver multiple functions and services. Some landscapes may be quite straightforward to manage, so intensive agricultural land is basically primarily for food production, and we're quite good at managing landscapes in this sort of way. But increasingly, we're asking big challenges from our landscapes and asking them to deliver lots of different services simultaneously. And we need to be able to understand how biodiversity underpins these relationships in order to make decisions, because we need to understand the trade-offs between these different benefits and how biodiversity impacts on these. We're interested in landscapes that are subject to rapid change because these are the landscapes that are under the most pressure. So whether this is pressures from drivers like policy or environmental change, this is where the biggest challenges in the future are going to be. So we're interested in those landscapes where future drivers are likely to have the greatest impact. And finally, we're interested in those landscapes where the most pressing need to fill in the gaps in understanding and knowledge. So some landscapes have been studied quite well, but other landscapes we have much less understanding, specifically of the importance of biodiversity and how it underpins multiple ecosystem services and benefits. So the first landscape type that we're going to be dealing with is wetlands and freshwater rivers. So within wetlands, we're looking both at coastal systems, such as this coastal wetland landscape, and also freshwater wetlands. So wetlands are very important in terms of sequestering and storing carbon and also nutrient cycling. and they're also important for cultural services like recreation. Fresh waters are very important for providing water, for maintaining water quality, and also rivers serve an important function for flood protection. So there's a whole raft of different types of services from wetlands and rivers that we want to consider. The second landscape is agricultural lowland mixed landscapes. Now clearly, as this picture shows, some of these landscapes are very productive and we get lots of food from them. But also, well-managed lowland landscapes for agriculture can also include things like hedges and small farm woodlands that are very important for biodiversity. So these can increase the ability of these landscapes to provide other services as well as food production. So things like storing of carbon or providing habitats for pollinators or natural enemies that can help control crop pests. So again, these landscapes, although they may have a primary function of food production, they're also important for lots of other types of services too. The third landscape is uplands. Now uplands have had quite a lot of research done on them over the last few years. But we're interested in looking at uplands not just from the point of view of production of food from pastoral agriculture, but also uplands are important from the point of view of sequestering carbon, storing nutrients, and storing water and water supply. Uplands are also important culturally in terms of recreation, for example, for walking, climbing, and so on. And the final landscape we're looking at is urban areas. Now, urban areas may seem a surprising choice for a programme that's concentrating on biodiversity, but urban areas actually contain the highest concentration of people who benefit from biodiversity. So this is where the benefits from ecosystem services are really felt, even though the ecosystem services themselves may be provided far away in the uplands. But within urban areas as well, green spaces can be particularly valuable for providing ecosystem services. So green spaces can help to store carbon, green spaces can help to filter out pollutants and help in the regulation of air quality. And they're also very important in terms of providing cultural benefits, such as increasing well-being, providing opportunities for recreation and so on. So how will the BESS programme work? Well, the Natural Environment Research Council has set aside £13 million of funding over the next 6 years. This is going to be split into two tranches. In the first tranche of funding, we're going to be spending about £9 million. What we're looking to do is to fund 3 to 4 large consortia projects spread across the 4 landscapes that we're looking at. One of the key things about the biodiversity and ecosystem service area in the UK is that we need to build capacity in this area. We need to develop young researchers with skills in this area. And so these will specifically be targeting early career fellowships with research fellows working alongside the existing consortia and helping to integrate the research across the programme. The final thing about BESS is it's very much an interdisciplinary programme. The emphasis is on taking an integrative approach to understanding these problems. And so to do this, we're looking for building consortia which have natural scientists working along social scientists and physical scientists so that we can develop an integrative and interdisciplinary understanding of how biodiversity relates to ecosystem functions and ecosystem services and ultimately the benefits we acquire from these. So through this programme, we're hoping to build a more sustainable future in terms of biodiversity and ecosystem services.